Very happy to have Michael Connett here. He is the lead attorney for the groups that are suing the EPA over fluoridated water. Michael, I have been seeing this over the last week, and a lot of people are tweeting this. This specifically came from Callie Means, but then Dr. Aaron Cariotti retweeted it. And he says another conspiracy theory bites the dust. And the tweet that Callie Means says the government put fluoride in our water and attacked anyone who questioned it. Now the NIH, after major pressure, has declared it, quote, reduces the IQ of children and is, quote, hazardous to human health, and states are removing it from water. This is undercovered news. Now, it is getting covered in some places, okay? Like in NBC has really changed its headlines over the last 6 years. This is benefits of adding fluoride to water may be waning. New research suggests the widespread use of fluoride in toothpaste may have minimized the benefits of water fluoridation. This comes from October 3rd, 2024. Let me take you back in time for a second to an article from 2018 where they say science says, which I love it. I always know you got to put on the brakes when you see the news write science says, okay? Just science says. Fluoride in water is good for kids. So why are these towns banning it? And the whole article is basically just about this, quote, cult of naysayers about fluoridated water. So let's start with this, since this is what everybody's talking about right now. From the National Toxicology Program, fluoride exposure, neurodevelopment, and cognition. And what they say in their findings is that higher levels of fluoride exposure, such as drinking water containing more than 1.5 milligrams of fluoride per liter, are associated with lower IQ in children. Now, they do say there was insufficient data to determine if the low fluoride level of 0.7 milligrams per liter currently recommended for U.S. community water supplies has a negative effect on children's IQ. So I don't see them necessarily going out there and saying, oh, the whole fluoridated water program is bad. I don't see them going that far, but they do make the connection between a buildup of fluoride and a lower IQ in kids. Is this big news for you or not so much? We'll just start right there.
It's very big news. I mean, this is the National Toxicology Program, which are it's the subject experts at the federal government for the toxic effects of chemicals. And this was a review, Allison, that the NTP has been working on since 2016. So they spent 8 years on this. It's a very comprehensive review, detailed review. And the NTP concluded that the evidence is consistent in showing that elevated fluoride exposure is associated with reductions in childhood IQ. When we started fluoridation, some 80 years ago, this was supposed to be about the teeth and the teeth alone. The whole notion that fluoride is a neurotoxicant or could damage the brain was not part of the equation. It's not what people signed up for when we agreed or when fluoridation was started here in the U.S. So you'll hear like the American Dental Association and other longtime proponents of this practice say, well, the NTP, they were only really confident in this association between fluoride and reduced IQ at 1.5 parts per million and above. And so we fluoridate at 0.7, which is about 2 times less. And so no problem, right? That's the sort of party line for those still promoting this practice. But there's many problems with that. And the first is that people drink very different. I mean, some people drink a lot of water. Some people don't drink that much water. And there is an overlap, a clear overlap in exposure between people living in 0.7 ppm areas and people living in 1.5 ppm areas. So we know, like, for instance, if you look at the amount of fluoride in the urine of a pregnant mom, okay, and you look at pregnant moms living in fluoridated communities in the United States, okay, you will find levels of fluoride in about 5 to 10% of them that exceed the levels of exposure that you see in these 1.5 ppm areas. So the long and short of it is if you have a hazard at 1.5 ppm, you're going to have that hazard in some people at 0.7 ppm. And so that's the first point. I mean, there's many other reasons why the NTP's conclusions are highly relevant to those of us living in fluoridated areas. But again, the big point here, I think, is we now have the US government concluding that fluoride lowers IQ at some level of exposure. And that's just not what we signed up for with water fluoridation. And do we really want to still be adding a chemical to our water that's a neurotoxicant and that can affect IQ? And lastly, Allison, the NTP never says that exposures below 1.5 are safe. They never say that. They just say it's unclear. So that's something to keep in mind. There's no stamp of approval, and there's no government body saying yes, 0.7 ppm is safe for the brain.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of government programs or safety standards, I guess, that I have noticed over the years are based on just lack of knowledge. And sometimes I think they do that on purpose so that they can't prove themselves wrong. Like they can track so many things about our behavior if they really wanted to. They can find out exactly where we are, and they're pretty close to even figuring out what we're thinking at this point in time. So they're great at surveillance, but not at the expense of whatever particular program they're trying to push. And so then they just feign ignorance, I guess, like, well, we just didn't study this, or like, VAERS is something I talk about quite a bit. They throw VAERS up about like vaccine adverse reactions, and they're like, well, we just can't trust VAERS because self-reporting, and we just don't know, and the data could be all hodgepodge. It's like, well, you guys could figure this out. Like, if you wanted to figure it out, you could figure it out. I kind of look at it now, I think, with more nefarious lens, I guess. I used to maybe just think it was ignorance, but now I think there's a purposeful reason that they don't look into certain things. And maybe, fluoride is one of them. Like, we just, we didn't look at these. We could have, I guess we could have, but we just didn't do it. And anyway, that's just the way I look at it. Real fast, Michael, it's kind of a joke, but sort of not. Hey, if you only have fluoridated water access and you're looking for a good bottle of wine, then you can go to AllisonWinePromo.com and support the show. We have some amazing bottles in the collection. You get basically 6 bottles every 3 months, and they are from very remote regions of the world. They include biodynamic organic wines that come from vineyards that are over 200 years old, wines from vineyards that are almost 9,000 feet in altitude. There are places where these families are still practicing the same winemaking techniques that their families have for 5-6 generations. They're very good wines. They make for great presents. They support the show, and I cannot recommend them highly enough if you're a wine drinker. You can't get this stuff at the grocery store. Really, you can only get it through Bonner Wine, honestly, because there's such limited supplies, tiny little family operations. And they even have a wine hunter guy who goes around, risks his life. You might think he's crazy that he risks his life to find the best wine in the world. That's fine. We can have a conversation about that another day. But anyway, he goes all over, tastes these wines, brings it back to the United States, and it's a great way to support the show. AllisonWinePromo.com. Okay, so yeah, I mean, we go back to that if you want to, or go right into the lawsuit. Do you find that when you mentioned that they don't have an answer for some of this stuff, do you think that's purposeful, or they just don't have the funding to look into it? Am I being too negative about it all?
Well, there's an important point here that I should have made already, which is that it's not that we have an absence of data currently with fluoridated water and IQ. And in fact, one of the very important facts is we already have some studies, Allison, high quality studies that have been done, which have found significant associations between fluoridated water at 0.7, the level that they add to our water here in the US, and reduced IQ. There was several high quality studies funded by the NIH done in Canada and Mexico, which have found that the so-called optimal level of fluoride exposure for the pregnant mom is associated with reductions in IQ in children at ages 3, 4, 6, and 12. So the NTP, I would say, was quite cautious and conservative in saying that their confidence is really for the 1.5 ppm, the elevated exposures. There is high quality data as we sit here today linking fluoridated water to IQ loss. But even if we ignore those studies at 0.7 ppm, it's still concerning in and of itself that you have just a little bit higher than that, and you have the U.S. government concluding that fluoride is causing IQ loss. So there's a very small margin right now, no matter how you look at it, there's a very small margin between the levels that many, many people are getting today and the levels that we know affect the brain.
This article from the AP U.S. government report says fluoride at twice the recommended limit is linked to lower IQ in kids. And they do say the report, based on an analysis of previously published research, marks the first time a federal agency has determined with moderate confidence that there is a link between higher levels of fluoride exposure and lower IQ in kids. While the report was not designed to evaluate the health effects of fluoride in drinking water alone, it is a striking acknowledgement of a potential neurological risk from high levels of fluoride. I could almost fall over and bash my head on the floor reading the AP actually willing to go there. What do you make of the media following this? I mean, like you said, the information's been there for a long time. I was a TV journalist for a long time. I parroted the government many times without questioning it, thinking that the CDC, the NIH, they were all just here to help us. The FDA, they're telling us the truth. They didn't have any bias. They're just the government, so they're giving us the objective facts. So it took me many years, and honestly, it was the end of my career, really, when I started to wake up to what was really going on. What do you make of the media's switch on this? Is it just they're just switching because the government switched, so it's just safe now to talk about it? Do you find that more people are willing to kind of question this particular issue? And how do you think the media has played the role in suppressing, I guess, the information you've tried to get out? Have they done that intentionally? Or, I mean, have you guys tried to get the word out, I guess, and they just never want to cover it? I'd love to just hear your thoughts on the role of journalists, I guess, and where we are today.
Yes. The mainstream media has been very disappointing and in their coverage of the fluoride issue historically. The media has presented the issue as, on one hand, the science, right? As you had noted, like the science supports fluoridation, and then you have a few crazy people who oppose it. And that's
right.
Then the typical framing on the fluoride debate, the fluoridation debate here in the US. And I think that has been a disservice to the very real and important questions that are being raised in the scientific literature. As reflected by the National Toxicology Program's report. One thing that I've been very encouraged by, and I think it's very important, and it's definitely happening, is you see over the past 10 to 15 years within the scientific community, the academic community, the research community, you see an opening where more and more scientists are looking into and studying the potential adverse effects of fluoride exposure. So you're seeing sort of a safer space being created for scientists to talk about and study this issue. And that's so important. We need that. We need scientists willing to investigate and willing to discuss these concerns. And we're seeing that happen. And that, to me, is so critical to ensuring that we can move beyond this sort of fossilization of public discourse and conceptions and stereotypes about this fluoride issue.
Okay, everybody, don't forget, if you want to be on the editorial board and put in questions ahead of time for interviews like Michael, you can go to AllisonMorrow.locals.com. It's $5 a month, which basically comes out to like 15 cents a question to ask whatever you want to the people that come on the show, some of the most censored people on the internet. So go join the editorial board. We got a bunch of questions from Michael in a little bit. Don't forget also, you can send me real mail, P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida 34432. I get seeds for the garden. I get artwork, photographs, notes of encouragement, donations for the show. Nothing creepy because the kids open it on the way home from the P.O. Box, and nothing edible unless it's like we are talking about send me a half cow or something like that, but don't send that to my P.O. Box because it will probably go bad. P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida 34432. Let's go to the lawsuit right away here before we spend any more time on anything else. EPA must review risks. Well, it looks like, wow, they've got a little bit of a typo there. EPA must review risks of fluoride in drinking water to children, judge rules. A federal judge in San Francisco stressed he wasn't concluding with certainty that fluoridated water endangers public health. So they do kind of downplay what happened a little bit. Like the judge wasn't saying that it was a danger to public health, but does seem, in the decision, and this is what you're working on. This is the case you're working on. So you're the guy to talk to. That this judge was like, hey, it poses enough of a risk that the EPA must go back and review what's going on here. So why don't you first just lay the groundwork for us? What did the judge decide in this particular case? And was it a big deal or not? Does NBC right to say, he didn't go so far as to say it endangers public health?
I think the NBC here is downplaying both what the court said and the significance of the court's ruling. The court concluded expressly so that adding fluoride chemicals to drinking water poses, quote, an unreasonable risk of reduced IQ in children, end quote. I'll say that again. The judge concluded in an 80-page opinion, very detailed, very thorough, that fluoridation poses, quote, an unreasonable risk of reduced IQ in children. That was the court's findings. This is a case that has been going on, and I've been litigating for over 7 years. The court heard extensive expert testimony from leading scientists in the field, including scientists at the EPA presented. And so this was a very informed decision that the court took a lot of time in reaching. And based on this decision and the court's finding, the court has ordered the EPA to initiate rulemaking proceedings to eliminate the risk posed by fluoridation. So it's the first time in the 80-year history of fluoridation where you have had a federal court make a conclusion like this, that fluoridation presents a real risk to human health and that the federal government needs to do something to eliminate it.
What's the next step?
Well, the next step is, one, the EPA could appeal the court's decision. We're still waiting for the EPA's determination on that. Mm-hmm. If the EPA does not appeal, then they need to move immediately into a rulemaking phase, which will be all about how do we eliminate this risk to the brain that the court has identified. And that will be EPA's obligation under the law to do. They will need to do something to make sure that this program that we have in the United States, where over 200 million people are impacted, is not affecting and damaging the brain of the developing brain of children.
One thing I thought was interesting is they do mention in this article that the judge was an Obama appointee. And I always pick up on when the news references which president did the appointing and stuff, because a lot of times if it's a Trump appointee, it's like, can you believe this person did this? And so it was like one of their own, it's one of their own. And that makes it harder to reject because okay, it's like, so I kind of wonder about that too, with the media willing to kind of go there with it, because it's like, that wasn't a Trump judge. This is our guy. But I am curious from behind the scenes how the legal system has worked for you all. Have you found it to be fair? I interview a lot of people who, well, first off, just the fact that nowadays it seems like people are constantly suing the government to get them to follow the law, which I find to be unnerving, really, because we pay their salaries and then we pay their lawyers and then we have to pay our lawyers in order to hold them accountable. And it seems like a big mess. But then they get to court and then they find out that maybe the judicial system is not what they thought it was going to be, and that you can't necessarily get justice in the United States in some cases because it has become so polarized. How has the judicial system been for you?
This has been, I think, an example of the court system working as it's intended to. And that was, we had a very fair process for both sides. We had a very intelligent judge who, we had 2 trials in this case, Allison, with very extensive expert testimony. And the judge was always, it was great to see, but the judge was always interrupting the experts and asking really on point and intelligent questions to best understand the science. So it was a very thorough vetting, this process that we've had, a very thorough vetting of the latest science on fluoride and the brain. And so I couldn't be happier with the kind of forum that we had here. And it is what Congress intended when they passed this law that we filed suit under. The law is the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA, which Congress passed in 1976. And as part of this statute, Congress created what's called a citizen petition provision. And that allows citizen groups to bring suit against the EPA if the EPA is not doing its job in protecting the public from an unreasonable risk posed by the particular use of a chemical. And as the courts have acknowledged and discussed, Congress passed this law so as to ensure that bureaucratic lethargy does not undermine EPA's administration of this vital authority to protect public health. And so what you see with this court case, while it took a long time, over 7 years, I think we were able to accomplish what the statute is intended to accomplish, which is to be a check on the EPA and to force EPA's hand when it's not doing its job to protect the public from a clear and identified risk.
All right, I'm going to take a couple viewer questions in a second. Before I do that, if you would like the product that I use that I think actually does really help your teeth, it's a cod liver butter oil blend. It's like the product that Dr. Weston A. Price, natural dentist, turn of the century guy, said would really help people as he studied indigenous cultures around the world. Greenpasture.org, use Allison at your promo code, 10% off at checkout. It's this right here, fermented cod liver oil and concentrated butter oil blend. And I like the cinnamon tingle gel. That's what we take here. My kids take it every day. And I used to get cavities all the time. Got my vitamin D up. It's full of omegas. It's just a great product. It's not a supplement. It's really a food. My dad's an orthopedic surgeon. He started taking this about 15 years ago to avoid root canals. He healed his teeth naturally. Go check it out. Greenpasture.org, promo code Allison at checkout. They've got a bunch of other great products there, but that's what I take.